and our views of the mind and our neuroscientific views, and certainly not in our religious views, perhaps, I don't know, that we suffer. This is the Buddha's analysis. We're going to go into this. We suffer because we're not in touch with reality. We suffer because we're living in kind of la-la land. And so this is, to understand that, we'll go into it, is to understand the Buddhist model of the mind. It's quite interesting, you know. So one way of, it's interesting, if you look at the word Buddha, it's interesting, it's a Sanskrit word. And then the kind of the taste, the meaning of the etymology of that word is kind of very tasty. The syllable Bud implies the utter eradication from our mind, from our consciousness. These words are used kind of synonymously in Buddhist philosophy. that word implies the utter eradication from our being, from our consciousness, of all ego, all fears, anger, depression, jealousy, anxiety, worries. We know these words. We are so intimate with these words. But of course, because in our modern views and our neuroscientific models of the universe, of the view of the mind, of the person, it's a very wacky idea. I mean, you go to a therapist, if you're a therapist in this room and I come to you and I say, would you please give me methods to get rid of all ego, all fears, all anger, all jealousy, all attachment forever? You'll think I'm mentally ill, I think. Because it's clear that I think we give equal status to all the different parts of our mind in our world, and think a normal person, you know, has some anger, some depression, some jealousy, some love, some kindness, some compassion. Because the second syllable, da, implies so the first one, the eradication of all the rubbish, and the second one is the development to perfection of everything else, love, wisdom, kindness. I mean, that sounds psychologically quite extreme, you know, so in fact, it's so weird, we can't get our heads around it, but this is exactly the Buddhist point. So anybody who's interested in Buddhism is trying to practice, this is the goal, you know. So that implies the job, doesn't it? If the end result of this work you're doing as a Buddhist, it's like a structured path, is you end up rid of all the rubbish and full of all the goodness, then it tells you the job. You better learn to understand the difference. You better learn to distinguish them. So you could say the key job of being a Buddhist, excuse me, using all the techniques like using meditation techniques we'll describe, are to help you identify in your own mind, in this big soup of emotion and thoughts and feelings and unconscious and subconscious, you know, to learn to identify, to distinguish between the neuroses, the miseries, the fears, and the valid, appropriate, virtuous, positive states. I mean, Buddhism uses words like virtuous and non-virtuous. We don't like that in psychology. It sounds a bit judgmental, you know, but it's got a really interesting meaning. So this is really the heart of being a Buddhist. One of our teachers, Lama Yeshe, says, you know, being a Buddhist is being your own therapist. And it sounds like a good marketing ploy, but it's actually extremely accurate. So if it is possible, this person called Buddha is telling us that it's possible to rid yourself of all the dramas and fears and nonsense and even this sort of neurotic, concrete sense of a separate self, this attachment to get what the self wants, the aversion and panic when it doesn't, the anxiety, all these dramas that we are so intimately familiar with, that we really do believe are at the core of our being. This person called Buddha, and this is a key point about the Buddha. I mean, we might know this, but it's good to point it out because it implies certain things. He's not a creator. There's no concept of a creator in Buddhism. So if you have faith in a creator, don't be insulted, you know. I'm not trying to criticize. It's just a very different view. Buddha, the Buddha's view is we don't need creating, because the Buddha would suggest that our consciousness goes back and back and will continue on and on. It's a very different view, you know. So where did this information come from? That's a really interesting point. I remember in New Zealand years ago, I always quote this. Hello, people, you're all there. Carolina's in Belgium, Carol's in Wales, Lou is in the East Coast somewhere. There you all are. I can't see many of you. So anyway, there's this fellow in New Zealand. He was a scientist, actually. It was a very interesting question. I've never had this question before or since. He said, who revealed the teachings to the Buddha? And that's a totally valid question if you have faith in Jesus and who is the manifestation of God. If you have faith in Allah, if you have, you know, because we know, and almost our default assumption, isn't it, in our world, that religion equals a creator. In fact, if you don't believe in a creator, you're not religious. You sound like a communist, don't you? But this is what's interesting. Buddha does not assert a creator. So in that sense, radically different. So it's a really valid question. Who revealed these ideas to the Buddha? It's exactly correct if you're a Christian or a Muslim. So I said, would you ask Einstein who revealed the teachings about relativity to him? And of course, he and everybody else laughed. Of course, you wouldn't do that. Well, you would laugh. We know perfectly well that Einstein didn't get a vision. He didn't have a dream. He didn't make it up. He's not speculating. It wasn't revealed to him. That's what we think of as religion. So what is Einstein? Einstein, we know he's an intelligent fellow who used his noggin and he observed the world. What's a gardener? What's a botanist? A person who observes growing things, identifies with his intelligence, her intelligence, what's going on, proves it, codifies it, and presents it. So we know a botanist didn't make up botany. This is a really crucial point, because it's natural law. Well, that's Buddha's deal. There's no equivalent of God's law in Buddhism, because he's not a creator. He was a regular guy who became this Buddha, And where did he come from? And it's always good to remind us. I mean, we Christian Judaic culture, tracking ourselves back in Europe. What do we know about India? What do we know about Africa? What do we know about Asia? What do we know about Australian Aboriginals? Zero, We like the Greeks, we go back to them. So it's only interesting, these last few maybe 30, 40 years now, since the Dalai Lama and the Tibetans have been out of Tibet, people in our culture are now learning about this incredible system, this monastic university system in Tibet, that tracks itself back directly to this incredible system of the great Buddhist yogis and scholars in India, 7th, 8th, 9th century, before that. And then before that, before the time of the Buddha, these genius Indians, we know nothing about them. There was an astonishing system of incredibly sophisticated philosophy, psychology, metaphysics, meditation. They're the ones who created this skill that the world now knows called mindfulness, which is now commonly adopted among psychologists. It's actually a brilliant psychological skill that enables a person to completely subdue the grosser levels of our mind, the conceptual and the sensory, or the chaos, and to access these subtler levels of our mind that we in our modern views of the mind don't even posit as existing. So these Indians were extraordinary. And as I always quote, the Dalai Lama said, there were these amazing Indians more than 3,000 years ago who were the ones who began the investigation into the nature. World, and I'm the product of that system back then. So coming out of, for me, a Catholic background, and then a radical lefty political background after I gave up God and decided I prefer boys back in the 70s, 60s actually, when I first came to London. My father's English. So I went to London in the mid-60s, late 60s, ripe and ready for revolution. So, okay, so the Buddhist approach is that we suffer because of the nonsense in our minds. The outside world plays a role. You can't argue, but this is the crucial point the Buddha makes. And initially it's quite shocking to hear this because we immediately say, oh, you mean I'm the blame? That's how we tend to think of it, But the Buddha's not saying the outside world, if he sees my boyfriend punch me in the nose, everyone will agree he punched me in the nose, and that's not cool. That's unethical behavior, no argument. But this is an interesting point. The Buddhist view is, and we know this is true, but if you can change something, if you can get your boyfriend to stop hitting you and be a nice guy, please do it. But this is the point. What if you can't? Look at our lives, The point at which we all go crazy is when things go the way we don't want. And then we spend immense amount of time fiercely trying to change it, which is essentially the outside world. The boyfriend, the weather, the job, the food, you name it. And we should look into why we spend so much time changing the outside world. Because why? It's logical, because we assume it's the source of our happiness and the source of our suffering. It's pretty obvious. And that is exactly the philosophy we would say is true. And that's also the philosophy, I think, that our modern psychological views have. You go to your therapist and she describes what happened to you in the past, what mummy did, what daddy did, what the events were, what happened. We look at the outside world, we look at the events. And this is not arguing with it. They play a major role. But as far as we're concerned, they play the main role. Because, look at the Buddhist view, the materialist view of where I come from. We track ourselves back to mummy and daddy, and then where they come from, their mummy and daddy, and go back to the monkeys, isn't it? So that's the evolution of how we think and where we came from. We look at the external. So again, the Buddhist view doesn't argue with that, just as we're missing the main one, which is the mind. So this is why it's just interesting just for a second to hear the Buddhist view of where the mind came from. I mean, if you're a Christian, God put the soul there when mummy and daddy hopped into bed. Actually, if you're a Jew, I discovered this, God doesn't put the soul in there for a few months, which is why they think abortion's okay before, because it's not a real person yet, which is interesting. But the Christians would say God put the soul there. And the materialists, you just are the egg and sperm, and that's it. So mummy and daddy are the blame. But usually mummy's the blame, isn't it? Daddies don't get the blame, I think, so much. Poor mums get the blame, I think. Isn't it? It's really true, isn't it? So anyway, we assume, because we assume, don't we? I didn't ask to get born. We say that like a joke, but we mean it seriously. Like it's got nothing to do with me. Mummy and daddy didn't consult me before they made me. Can we make you, Robina, and give you a life and give you depression and anger? I just got plonked on this earth. That's how we think, isn't it? So it's fairly reasonable we'd have a blame mentality. If they made me, it is their fault. I agree with you. Really, I do agree. Sue your mother and father. How dare they give you anger and jealousy and neurotic? I mean, it really is true, but we dare not say that because you're not supposed to blame your mum. So anyway, it's like a joke, but it's not in a way. So if you think God put the soul there, you don't like to blame God. That's for sure. Some people do. I've heard Italians have the rudest words to blame God. I was shocked. I mean, and then some Brazilian fellow I met, he said, "Oh, we're worse than the Italians." I mean, I was a Catholic in Australia, and we would never say. My father was not a Christian. When he got angry, he would say, we would like wait for God to come through the ceiling, It's so shocking to hear those words. So, but I remember this Italian when Lama Yeshe, our teacher, up here somewhere. Is that behind me? Okay, he's up there. There he is on this side. So when he was in Italy, seeing one of his friends, he met him in the hospital, and all the Italian boys were translating what the men in the ward were saying, and Lama Yeshe was completely gobsmacked. They were saying God is a pig. Our Lady, of course, is a whore. Of course she is. I mean, I was really shocked by that. There's nothing to be Irish, The Irish, I mean, we're probably Irish Catholic. But I was very shocked by that. They blame God, So then who do we blame here? Well, the Buddhist view is that our consciousness, mummy and daddy give us a body. You can't argue with that. But the Buddhist approach, and this is coming from Buddha's observation, this guy who, I didn't finish before, but, who is he? Where did he get this information from? Like Einstein, I'll go back to that point for a second. Like Einstein, he used his own intelligence and observe the universe. But of course, if you can access subtle levels of your mind, which Buddhism asserts is possible, and that level of mind can cognize phenomena that are more subtle, and this is the Buddhist view, like the past, the future, the minds of others, that's not surprising in Buddhism, then you observe the universe, observe the minds of others, and whatever is Buddhism, like Einstein, is coming from his own direct observation. So as the Dalai Lama often says to us modern people, if you're practicing Buddhism and you track, you use Buddhist methodology, and you discover at some point the Buddha is wrong, then you must reject him. So that's why in Buddhism, sure, have faith. Faith is a useful thing to have. You're confidence, confide, with faith. You have faith in your doctor, you have faith in your friend. There's nothing wrong with that. But oh, there it is. There I am. Okay, good. Okay, fine. So, okay, so if it's possible to change your mind, it's really essential what we're thinking about. Then we need to be, and if it's possible to get less neurotic, less angry, less jealous, less depressed, that's the approach, like I said about the boyfriend, the external world do play the role. But the Buddhist point is, like I said before, if you can change it, please go ahead. But what if you can't? Now, this is the point. We all know this in our lives when we start to go crazy, when the suffering starts, isn't it? When everything's going nice, we're not complaining. But when the boy doesn't do what we want, when people are rude, when So that's the point at which, if we're brave enough, as we continue our lives, we can learn to navigate. So why is it so difficult? Let's look at the Buddhist logic of why it is so difficult to deal with difficulties. Why is it difficult to be happy when things are going wrong? It almost sounds funny, doesn't it? Why? First of all, because we believe that happiness is only when the nice things happen. So we rely upon the outside world. So that means we manipulate the outside world to make it just so that I can have happy feelings. Analyze our lives. It's perfectly normal. And then when the things go wrong, then we do our best to try and change those things. But we know when you really can't, and we know that's when we really can't cope. And when we get depressed, we go crazy, we kill ourselves, we kill other people, because we don't know how to navigate the difficulties. You know? So the Buddhist approach, and many of us are good at it, but we don't join the dots. Change it if you can, but best change your mind. So what does that mean? And this is the tricky part now. The Buddhist analysis of the mind, we've got this bunch of stuff that's negative and so-called negative, neurotic and ridiculous and painful, causes suffering. One of the characteristics of those states of mind, like attachment, anger, jealousy, one of the characteristics of those states of mind is that they are emotionally painful. That's clear. They're disturbing emotions. Check the last time you were anxious. Check the last time you were depressed or angry. You would definitely agree you were disturbed. That's clear. But the Buddhist approach is, and it's quite a subtle analysis, and it takes a while to go inside and to look at this, is that those emotions, which are very physical, we feel them physically. In fact, we don't notice them until the body is involved. You don't notice you're angry until the words are vomiting out the mouth. You don't notice you're depressed until you are inert in bed and can't move. And this is the key point in Buddhism. We leave it till too late. So the Buddhist view is that underpinning those emotions, and that's why we need to go into our minds ever more deeply, and that's the Buddhist skill. It takes time. We're going to start to notice that those emotions are underpinned by very strong, really like conceptual stories. So if you gave a personality to anger, what does anger say? Anger says, how dare you do that to me? I don't deserve it. I think we'd agree with that. That's what anger says. That's why the pain, especially when someone does utterly unfairly, you didn't do a single thing and this person punches you in the nose, we're so shocked. And then you see that, and so the Buddhist analysis is these different states of mind, especially three of them, they talk about two of them, mainly in our daily life, that are the source of all the other pain. And this is quite a precise analysis they do in Buddhist psychology. And this is not how we talk in modern psychology. And the names of those two main states of mind are attachment and anger. Now, these sort of kind of cute, you go to your therapist, I've got some attachment. She'll laugh at you. Go home until you've got a serious problem, please, Even with anger, we don't really consider anger a mental problem, anger a psychological problem. I mean, this is the Buddhist analysis of what our psychological problems are. He didn't say psychology back then. He didn't speak Greek, okay? He meant mental problems. Anger is a mental problem. And please excuse me and think about that. Not just depression, because we found certain chemicals that work on the body, so we now call it a mental problem. But nobody says anger is a mental problem. It's just a bad person, But anger is an extremely painful state of mind. It's emotionally painful for you. But look, like when you're a little kid, your mother says to you, oh, you're making a mountain out of a molehill. In other words, it exaggerates. And this is very shocking, especially when the things that are happening to us are so serious. It seems cruel to say that anger exaggerates them. But when we analyze what anger is, and this is a very precise analysis in Buddhism, and then we look at anger, where does it come
And so what's attachment? And this is a big deal in Buddhism. If we could, Lama Yeshe said, I can tell you about attachment for one whole year. You will never begin to understand it until you start going deep inside. So this is the one for the Buddha that drives all of us deep in the bones of our being. It's not the only thing that happens. We've got the positive love, compassion, wisdom, confidence, all these are our saving grace. But this other one and the other...
This is an erotic one. And it's a primordially deep state of mind. It's multifaceted. Every being in the universe has got it. When you hear words in Buddhism like, you're in samsara, that's what Buddhism means. Caught up in these erotic states of mind. So attachment, primordially, first of all, is like a deep feeling of dissatisfaction. I do not have enough. And that's what, naturally, if you don't feel you have enough, that drives you to search for something, to get it, to fill you up, so you have enough, isn't it? So it's like an emotional hunger. When it's really severe, and we all recognize this, I am not enough. I am not enough. And even it becomes self-hate. This is really common in our culture. We loathe ourselves. We think we are garbage. We do not like ourselves. So not only are we dissatisfied with what we've got or what we've achieved, we're never satisfied. We're not even satisfied with who I am. We know the pain of this is unbearable, you know. So attachment is energy of not feeling you have enough or am enough. So always you hanker then after things. So either we hanker after things, or for the deeper one, we hanker after people who will reinforce us, a person to love us, a person to like us. We know this one. This is our deepest attachment. We don't feel we're valid until we have a partner. We don't feel we're valid at work until someone praises us. We know this. We recognize this. And we just take it for granted. Well, the Buddhist view is everything we are is in here. And we can develop everything in here and learn to be content, learn to be fulfilled, learn to be utterly satisfied with who we are and what we are. That's the Buddhist approach. I mean, these aren't religious words. We know that. They're practical words. We might even think this ourselves. But the Buddhist method is to do this, you know, by changing these states of mind. So the point is, the emotional component is very evident when you're angry or depressed or jealous or anxious or have low self-esteem. The emotional component is there, you know, the body is involved. But because we don't pay attention to our minds, we don't really have techniques like that in our culture. We don't know we are angry until the words come out the mouth. That's our style, isn't it? And it's just a bit late. It's too late, you know. So that what we've got to see is, and this takes time, is recognize that emotional component of the anger, the shaking, the shouting, you know, is rooted in being a conceptual thought way deep down in our mind. It's very subtle, very instinctive, program. And this is where it's helpful to hear at least the Buddha's view. We come into this life not like an empty slate that then mummy and daddy then proceed to create. We come into this life programmed with our own tendencies. And this is the key radical point that Buddha makes, which takes time for us to think about, is that our thoughts and feelings and emotions and good qualities and bad qualities and being good at football, being good at music, whatever they are, they don't come from mummy, they don't come from daddy, they don't come from a creator. They come from our own past. We are programmed with our own stuff. And that really is the meaning of this word karma, you know. The simplest meaning of karma is that everything we think and do and say programs us, produces the person we become. So when we die, it's all very detailed in the way it's described in the Buddhist teachings, our consciousness finds another rebirth and off we go again, you know. So the implication of this is the real point here. If you really do believe you're an innocent victim who didn't ask to get born, and you really do believe your mummy and daddy are to blame, well, look at the emphasis that you'll put on that. But if you have this view, even intellectually, that you came into this life with your own tendencies, then straight away from this is ownership. And gradually, as you take responsibility for what's inside here, not the boyfriend's punch, that's his problem. And you'll know you'll be able to change yourself. Because look at the fundamental point about the Buddhism is quite extensive in the literature, is there's nothing set, the mind is not set in stone. And this is a tragedy. We feel it is. Look at when you feel you're no good. 37 people can tell you you're okay. We will not believe it. Look at us. We know that. When you're really angry at your boyfriend and he says, I didn't really mean that, you won't believe it. So when we're caught up in these unhappy emotions, one characteristic is they're very absolute, very concrete, very fixed. And we truly believe in that view. When you're really angry, nothing will convince you that that boyfriend didn't mean that. Nothing will convince you that person at work, didn't do what you think they did. We know we can see that, and that's the pain of these states of mind. So the key one is to learn to know your own mind. And it's not mystical. I mean, when we close our eyes and look like we're meditating, it sounds really mystical. It's not. It's just practical. You don't want to get distracted, close your eyes. That's all. And it's learning to become super familiar with the workings of your own mind. And this, of course, is an immensely difficult job because we don't do it. We learn about the brain. We know all about that with microscopes. That we're good at. But to know our own thoughts and feelings and emotions and unconscious, that's a job we don't necessarily learn. Now with therapy, maybe we begin to do that. We go to a therapist, this person who becomes a sounding board for us to help us unpack and unravel what's in there in a safe environment. Marvelous. That's the Buddhist skill that we can all learn. So it demands taking responsibility. Yeah, you might have a creepy boss. You might have an ugly husband. No argument. But this is the difficult part. We really believe that my anger is coming from that activity. We don't like to think it's my anger. We want it because ego gets very guilty. What do you mean I'm angry? It's his fault. What do you mean I should change my anger? He should change. We can see how we think about it. So it takes courage to own it. I mean, I was angry since I was a little girl. Mummy didn't have to teach me, I promise. So to get to the point where it's true that people do things to cause you to be angry, that's true. But what we're trying to deal with is what's in here. And that's a major piece, try to own what my part of it is. And that's difficult, especially in relationships where you're negotiating all the time. Well, if you look at your mind and you take responsibility, I'll take responsibility. The job here is to really know your own mind, really know the qualities, the good and the bad, not just the bad. Ego, ironically, gets addicted to the bad stuff. We love to talk about our bad stuff. We never talk about our good stuff. We're embarrassed to say it. So we have to know the rounded view of our own self, our good qualities, our tendencies. These are major things we need to understand and own and be respectful to ourselves about. Because when you know yourself, the good and the bad, you can learn to take responsibility for all of it, This is generally the job of being a Buddhist. I think you should ask me some questions. I don't know. I think I'm going in the direction you want it to go. Ask me some questions, if you'd like. Yes.
When we are talking about attachment,
What's sweetheart?
yes, so we are talking earlier about attachment. It sounds like a negative feeling.
Oh yeah, I'm going to go more into attachment.
But when
yeah.
Children, for example,
What's sweetheart?
For children.
What about it?
Like they are naturally
I understand.
attached to the
I'll
person.
describe.
It's different for children.
Yeah, no, I'll tell you. I didn't describe it enough. I'll go into more brutal detail about what attachment is, okay? So again, this model of the mind is not how we're used to in our modern culture, but try and hear this model. We've got some states of mind that are totally I-based, fear-based, neurotic, disturbed, distorted, delusional, and the source of our pain. Can you hear those words? If you can try and get this idea, there's some states of mind, and attachment is the main one of these in daily life. It gives, then you've got anger and jealousy and all these other ones. That's the Buddhist analysis. So the definition of this attachment isn't love, isn't closeness to children, isn't a virtue. The second qualities are love, compassion, empathy, kindness, intelligence. Now we know all these words, right? And we know the first lot are miserable. When I say those words, they're miserable. And the second lot, we like those. So the key thing in the Buddhist view is to begin to distinguish between these neurotic, deluded, unhappy states of mind and the positive, appropriate ones. But the trouble is they're mixed together like a big soup. So when we use the word attachment, we mean a bit of love and closeness. We mean it as a good thing, but that's not the definition for the Buddha. It's not that state of mind, it's another state of mind. If I say to you emotional hunger, neediness, expectation, possessiveness, those qualities, that's attachment. Now we recognize those, don't we? But we assume in our culture they're normal. But the Buddha will say they're normal, we've all got them, but they're painful and we can learn to identify them and change them. Do you see what I'm saying here? So attachment, I'll just begin with it. Attachment, first of all, is this primordial emotional hunger, dissatisfaction. Then, because you're dissatisfied, naturally, you hanker after something. You look for something out there. Naturally, that's where we look. The world is out there as far as we're concerned. The objects of the senses, either people, things, handbags, money, you name it, look at us. Then attachment has the function of, when you get the boyfriend, let's say, the key function of attachment is to exaggerate his deliciousness. Now, we know we do this. Because 1 week later, when you discovered he cheated on you, now how does he look? This second state of mind has now arisen, and it's called anger. So the object, you manipulate, you get the object, the person, the handbag, the food, you name it. It looks gorgeous, and it looks, so attachment exaggerates the deliciousness of the object, the food, the cake, the boyfriend. Attachment thwarted, or when it doesn't get the right cake or the boyfriend does the wrong thing, it turns into this panic attack of the bare bones state of mind called aversion. So the volatile level of aversion is anger. A milder level of aversion is annoyed, irritated, frustrated. We do this every day. And the internalized expression of aversion is depression and despair. And these build up, they're not just second by second, they build up. So the key Buddhist point is we suffer because of attachment and anger, and they're intimately connected, and that we go through between these two 1,000 times a day. So attachment is emotional hunger. Then you manipulate to get the object. Then you have this massive expectation that you'll get that happiness that you assume the boyfriend will give you, and then you possess the person. So possessiveness, expectation, emotional hunger, this neediness, this dissatisfaction, they're all a function of this particular state of mind. The Buddhism would refer to as attachment, and everybody in the universe has it. And so the degree that that's more prevalent in my life than, say, love, that to the degree I will suffer. So if there's a relationship with my boyfriend, if there's love and patience and kindness and generosity, which are valid states of mind because they're more reasonable, they're connected to the other person, they're more empathetic, more altruistic, they are the source of my happiness. So if my relationship goes well, and we know this, it's because I've worked on it, I'm more loving, I'm forgiving, I'm kind, I'm generous. They are the source of my happiness, and the other ones are the source of my pain. So of course, don't believe the Buddha. I've got to identify this and see if it's right, It's quite intricate because these emotions flood us and are going so fast, we don't pay much attention until they're too late, that's our trouble. So it's a big answer, but does it make sense what I'm saying? This is the Buddhist definition of the word. Yeah.
Completely trust yourself.
I think it's a process for all of us if you're trying to do this job. It's like if you're learning music, in the beginning you don't know any music, but as you get better and better, you trust yourself more. You trust your wisdom, don't you? Would you agree? Any skill that we're learning, it's the same here. It was a brand new idea to me. So it's the same thing in learning to, I was joking then, none of you laughed, but never mind. It was meant to be funny. But it's like even as about, put it this way, if the skills you're trying to learn in any body of knowledge are valid, if you develop them properly, you will get more confidence, won't you? Do you agree with that? Okay. So same here. If you really do it properly, if it's just intellectual, nothing will change. If you're sincerely trying to do it, I can see the little bit I'm trying to do sincerely, that you become more content, more fulfilled. I don't have so much anger. I don't blame so much. You don't get so jealous. You literally lessen those emotions. You don't suffocate them. And it's quite shocking because in our world, we think it's normal to have them and you'd be weird if you didn't have them. Do you understand? But the Buddhist view is the more we identify them, we can see that they're the source of our pain. And as you lessen them, you're growing your contentment, you're growing your kindness and love and compassion, you're growing your empathy, and they become a more valid part of you. you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And if you're doing it properly, you're gonna see the difference. Of course you will.
Okay.
If you're just pretending it's all intellectual, then you'll never see any difference. Do you understand?
Thank you.
Good, Tom. Thanks. Who else, people? Any questions at all? Yes, come on.
Okay, so if you get to the point where you can recognize attachment and
Yeah.
and aversion and where you personally cannot change it.
That's right.
So say I've got anger for
That's
example,
right.
I can't change that situation.
Yeah.
What do I do then?
Well, I mean, that's a really good point. What you said is, if you start to look at the attachment and the anger and you can't change the situation, what do you do then? Well, because you've changed your view, changing anger means you've got a different set of words in your mouth. Ordinary example, darling, I'm sure you've done it. You've got a sister or somebody?
Brother.
A brother, okay. So sometimes you might get angry with your brother. There you go. Good idea. Okay, now, I bet sometimes you've actually, maybe you've decided, I'm not going to say anything. You've decided, well, you just changed your mind. So that's exactly, if you have the anger, how dare you do that? Who does he think he is? And then you say, shut up, girl, give it a break. That's exactly what you do. I'm
So
talking
you like
about.
to fuse it and internally.
You literally, and the more sooner you catch it, I mean, if you get to the point of being angry for weeks and you want to murder him, it's a bit late.
Yeah.
But the sooner you grab it and hear the words in it, we all know that our head never stops. You agree? We call it emotion, but if we wrote down every thought we have, are you hearing what I'm saying? We know there are so many thoughts, we can't believe it.
Yeah.
The thoughts are the emotions, darling. Anger, we feel the physical, but it's words. So then when you start to hear your thoughts, you really begin to be in touch. And the sooner you can grab the thoughts before they become big, that's when you can start to argue. It's like you have a little debate with yourself. The good thoughts in you, the wise ones, like you're talking to yourself. We all do this all the time. We all talk to ourselves all the time. We're either beating ourselves up, being angry with a brother, or we never stop. But we're trying to cultivate a more positive conversation in our head where we can become our own therapist. Give it a break, Robina. Give it, for God's sake. Literally, it's not like holding, you learn to become more familiar with your thoughts before they become very emotional, is the ideal eventually. Yeah. And you literally argue with yourself, you change your thoughts, and then you develop new habits. You develop the habit then of being patient, it eventually manifests. Everything's habit. Do you understand my point?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's
I
like
think it's just
that.
my natural impatience. I think it's like a switch, but
No,
it's
not a switch,
progressive,
baby.
isn't it?
It's hard bloody work. I tell you.
Yeah.
I mean, it's something you learn overnight. If you want to, you start knowing zero maths, right? You don't just magically become a mathematician overnight. You have to squeeze your brain every day to learn new thoughts. Same here emotionally, though. And you've got to dig deep down because we're so used to the physical feeling, we don't even think it's thoughts. Buddha's a cognitive therapist, I tell you. It's all based, these emotions are just the external expression of thoughts deep down that are very habitual since we're children and we came with them, Do you understand? Yeah. So it takes a lot of work to look inside, and it takes a lot of integrity and courage, because when you're really angry, all you want to do is blame your brother. And you're an innocent victim, guaranteed, isn't it? And that's extreme. We know there's always, what is it your mother say? There's always takes two to tango or something. I mean, it's cute, but it's really profound. But it's very hard to own it, isn't it?
Yeah, in my head, it's 100% there.
That's right, darling. Precisely. That's exactly right. That's right. So in this whole business of changing our thoughts, it sounds so simple, it's ridiculous. But it's like I always use extreme examples. I mean, people who've heard me before, my friends on Zoom have heard this. But it's like, where I worked for many years running our prison project, and I work with people in prison, especially in America. But the prison system is pretty intense, I tell you. They are, Americans are 5% of the world population, but they're 25% of the prison population. You mean a quarter of all humans on the planet who live in prisons live in US prisons. I mean, there's so many ways it's the worst in the world. Maybe not as bad as some countries are evil, but just the policies, the politics of it, the sentencing, it's just unbelievably heavy. It's like such an eye-opener. And of course, all poor. I mean, I haven't met a rich person on death row, I promise. A few rich people in prison, maybe, the psychopaths, perhaps. But the rest of all 9% it's like the armies and all the poor people. I was editing a magazine, and a young Mexican American, Arturo, in California, where the gangs are really powerful activity. Things are changing a bit now. And he was like, he's 11 in the gangs, 12 he was sent to prison, 16, sentenced as an adult, And he got out finally about 41, you know, he's 41, a miracle. Well, he read a book. He was in his isolated cells, 23 hours a day in his cells, in these big prisons, especially permanent lockdown, they call it. Permanent lockdown, they call it. So there he was in his own cell, 20, and the library was a good library. He got a book. And so he's reading this teachings by Lama Yeshe, and our address was in it. So he wrote, and that was the first person who wrote, and then within a year had 40 people. And so just intense of this suffering in these places, in these monstrous prisons, right? But I had several, and also many friends on death row. So sometimes some of the experiences are really intense. And of course, in America, it's really common, this, you know, the wrong sentencing. There's so many people wrongly accused. Unbelievable, shocking place, you know. Recognize that those states of mind are crazy. And that's really the point the Buddha is making. He didn't make this up, we can prove it. But it takes such courage to do that. It takes unbelievable courage, even the smallest thing like your brother, you know, not being on death row for killing two you didn't kill. We know this, and this is where we go crazy because we can't let go of those thoughts. We can see this, but we have the power to do so. So you have to have the will to do it first, the courage that you can do it. And this is where in the Buddhist literature, there's lots of teachings and analysis about how amazing our minds are, how amazingly brilliant our minds are. We're not discussing the brain, our states of being, and how we can learn to become intimately familiar with them. That I think is really delicious. And we've got, and this is the point the Buddha is making, which is abstract for us, that these unhappy states of mind are not intrinsic to us. They're not at the core of our being. We can not just get rid of them eventually, but radically change them. That I can tell you without any doubt is true. And any of us, we do this every day, but we don't think of it like this. We don't kind of join the dots, you know. We just take it for granted. But this is the key practice of being a Buddhist. And who, before you go any further to learn how to help others, who is the beneficiary of this? We are. It's not moralistic, you know, it's practical psychology. We have to see it. Whereas our trouble, I think, in our culture is we tend to have the view that you're allowed to be depressed, you're allowed to be angry, you're allowed to be neurotic. Look at the terrible things that happened to me. That might be true, but still, if you can change your mind, you are the beneficiary. And it's hard to do this because we don't like to let go. We want to blame, we want to be angry. We think if I give up being angry, then that proves your brother, you know, somehow your brother gets away with it. It's very strong for us. So there's courage, enormous courage, to decide that you are sick and suffering. It's a very powerful point, actually. And it's not moralistic, it's not religious, it's practical. We all want to be sane, we all want to be happy. We all don't want to be crazy, you know, pulled from pillar to post by the crazy world. We know we don't want that. But it takes time. I swear to you, it takes a lot of integrity. Anyway, blah, blah. What else? Any more questions? I haven't got my clock on me. What's the time?
8 o'clock.
How long we got? Hours.
One
For a
more.
whole other hour. I mean, I do talk fast. Maybe we've got already done 2 hours worth. But we can have more. Come on. Are there any more questions? Any conversation? Anything you want to talk
I've
about?
got a question.
Good, I'm happy.
You mentioned Freud earlier.
Freud, yes.
In your
Yes.
lecture. Are there parallels with his way of thinking and Buddhism?
I'm sure there must be, but I've got a feeling lots of people. I remember when I worked for Wisdom Publications years ago when I was based in England in the 80s, one of the books we published was by a Jungian therapist. I think Jung was more likely to be more in sync with some of the Buddhist views, I think. Jung definitely.
Jung was a student of Freud, wasn't he?
I think he was, wasn't he? But he developed very different views, a little bit more kind of esoteric, I think.
Okay.
I think his views probably were more like some of the Buddhist ones. I know we did this book by a Jungian therapist, relating it to the Buddhist approach. So I think there's lots of therapies. I mean, even what they call cognitive behavioral therapist. Buddha is the best cognitive therapist that you can find. Change your thoughts and you change your life. That's exactly Buddha's deal. So there's a lot of similarities in many of the psychological models, I'd say. I would agree with that.
You see, as a younger man, I used to study Gurdjieff and Uspensky.
Exactly. Yes,
and
I know.
these are very similar.
You're absolutely
Your
right.
teaching is very similar.
It's so true, isn't it? It's true. So I see. So it seems to me over the centuries in different cultures, that's my feeling. They seem to plug into the same ideas, don't they?
Yes.
That really shows that it's kind of universal. Don't you agree with that?
I do.
I know.
actually
Yeah,
accept
many of
what
the
you're
people, I
saying.
think, I know in the 70s, I met some of the students, good different people, and they really, you see there's so many similar ideas, many similar ideas. I agree with you. That's for me, that gives me confidence
Yes.
that these are universal truths,
Yes.
not something made up by somebody.
No, I
That's
accept.
helpful, isn't it?
Yeah.
I agree. And I think to find the common ground is really fantastic.
Mm.
Yeah, I agree with you. Really good point. Yeah. Yes.
Well, it's actually very similar to the gentleman here.
Yes.
I've come to this by reading about non-dualism.
Yes,
Eckhart
that's
Tolle.
the Indian.
Yes.
That's from before the Buddha, isn't it?
Yeah, and then also recent stuff like Rupert Spira, I don't know if you know, or Eckhart
Stein,
Tolle.
I've heard about him.
Yeah, so very similar, but the
Yes.
more I read about that, it's actually just Buddhism. I'm not saying it's original.
No, I understand what you're saying.
it's
No, it's
exactly
really
the same.
true. It's really is true. I agree with you. I think it's really true. And I think it's where it's, yeah, I agree. So many ideas. Yeah. And so in the end, we can, we can then choose to sort of take a certain track, isn't it? And go into that one. But I think it's so good. I know the Dalai Lama is really into that. And I think it's so important because we can get very fundamentalist with spiritual ideas and things. So he's always like bringing people together and looking for the common ground. I think it's so important. And even though for myself, coming up as a Catholic, and I was very devoted to God as a kid, I was really in love with God and Our Lady and the saints. For me, all the talks with, say, Dalai Lama's published some books, I think, of conversations with some of the Christian meditators. So much similarity, I remember years ago when we in Europe, when our organization invited the Dalai Lama to go around to teach in France and Germany. And Lama Yeshe was wonderful. He appointed 10 of us, 5 men and 5 women, to be security guards for the Dalai Lama. It was hilarious, Lama's very wonderful. He made us wear lay clothes. So I had to wear blue dresses and I had hair and I even put my lippy on, Looked like a nice lady, traveling around with a Dalai Lama on his aeroplanes and guarding his door. It was like a joke really, but it was so kind. So there was very fascinating. In Spain, he met with some of the Catholic meditators up in the mountains, these amazing yogis meditating day and night, you know, these incredible Catholic, mostly men. And I remember one of the places we couldn't go in, the girls weren't allowed in. It's okay, it's their laws, what to do. So these Carthusians, they call them, they pray and meditate day and night, these Catholic monks, right? And the Dalai Lama went in there several hours, and then some of the men who went in, they told us, and when they came out, they were just blissful from these conversations with the Dalai Lama. They got so much about the profound, about the absolute, about non-duality. It was incredibly powerful for their minds, meeting with the Dalai Lama, because they were just so moved by the discussions, you know. It's so good to see these things, I think. It's encouraging, isn't it? Because it's really true, it's the universal. This is not, that's where I think this is where, and I'm happy to be, I was a happy Catholic. I'm not criticizing Catholicism. But the crucial philosophical difference and realistic difference between the creator religions and the Buddhist one, that the creator is a being who made everybody, right? I don't know, do you have the view of creator yourself? No. So then, you know, and then more, it's more the view of punishment and reward because God's the boss. I mean, I always quote this. I've quoted it so many times. A Jesuit priest friend of mine, I asked him, how do you define a sin? What makes something wrong? And this is a really powerful answer. He said, a sin is doing what God said not to do. And that makes sense. If God is the boss, if there's a being who created the universe, created the laws, created me, then he holds the power. It's obvious, isn't it? So therefore, if you're naughty, that by definition is doing what God said not to do. But the Buddha, there's no concept like that. He is not a creator. It's a bit like for the Buddha, it's like going to your doctor. And that's, sorry, to finish one. So the Christian one is, because you are made by God and you do go against his will, then the changing has to come from God forgiving you. So that for the Buddha is a bit like going to your doctor and asking you to forgive you for smoking cigarettes, and then that will heal you of your cancer. We would laugh at that. Well, Buddha's more like the doctor. You rely upon the Buddha who's done this work of finding methods to purify yourself, heal yourself. And so then, you know, he would forgive you. He's a nice guy, but forgiveness is not the point. You know, you harm yourself and you make yourself happy. That's the view of karma. So there's no concept of like boss and punishment and reward in Buddhism. There's no creator, therefore there's no punisher, and there's no rewarder. We are the boss, the Buddha says. We harm ourselves, we can transform ourselves. It's a very different view, I think. I find that very powerful. And I like the Buddhist one. What to do? What else, people? Ask me some questions. Yes.
If Buddhism was more prevalent, do you think it would give way for potentially evil to prosper a little bit?
Say that again. Say what? It's a very interesting point. Say the first part.
If Buddhism was more prevalent, more widespread,
Okay.
do you think that could give rise to evil and bad acts being more prevalent?
Because there's no punishment and reward.
Yeah.
Ah, okay, they're very good point.
There's no one to get angry against them and to stop them. You see what I mean? So the action.
Oh no, that's a really good point. Now, thank you. That's a very curious point. That's very fascinating thinking. That's very interesting. Okay. The Buddhist approach is, first of all, for your own side, if you're working on yourself and you do, there's a nice analogy. A bird needs two wings, wisdom and compassion. So the wisdom wing is what we're talking here, all the nuts and bolts of what you do to put yourself together, to produce this marvelous, happy, content person. So the Buddhist approach is when you hear these teachings, you're listening to it for yourself. Okay, I know about anger and jealousy. I'm sick of this suffering. I'm going to change. So the consequence of that is you become more happy, more contained, more steady, more fulfilled, more joyful. And then you look at the world and you go, oh my God, we're all in the same boat. Look at all these crazy suffering people. So you have incredible compassion. But why you have compassion for people, when you see the angry person, you have incredible compassion for them, but you want to help them not be angry, not just let it go away, because you want to protect them from harming themselves and harming others. So out of your wisdom, it's like tough love as a parent. If you're a really good parent, you'll say no more chocolate, go to your room, but you are coming from real compassion because you're trying to help that person stopping harming themselves. So the real compassion comes when you do the wisdom wing, you see your own suffering, you see your own anger, your own garbage, and you're sick of it. So it's like you have compassion for yourself. So when you see others, you realize they're all harming themselves. So it's like you have incredible compassion for people, but it's very wise compassion. It doesn't just, let them get away with it. Not at all. You'd help in any way to help people protect themselves from themselves. So it's like compassion, but it could be very tough. Do you understand my point? It brings the opposite. So but it wouldn't just get, I'll let them be angry, it doesn't matter, because you have compassion for them, and it's the anger that's harming them, and the harm they do to others is terrible. Do you understand my point? It really brings compassion. This is surprising. So also I always tell this particular story. In 2003, when I was based in where I was, San Francisco or somewhere, running this prison project, and Richard Gere, he's a good Buddhist, and he seems to be a really good Buddhist. He invited the Dalai Lama to give teachings in New York, and he also decided to work with some prisoners. So we started to negotiate a bit about whatever, he did his own thing, and he invited 20 former prisoners, all of whom had done some kind of meditation in prison, to come and have a talk and meet the Dalai Lama. It was a very moving day, and some people like me were invited. So there's a whole cross-section of Americans, black, white, Puerto Rican, whatever, male, female. They had really nice talks, and they met the Dalai Lama. It was a very moving day, a lovely day. But he also invited a couple of Tibetan nuns who'd been abused, sexually abused and tortured in prison in Tibet, and they'd escaped. So they were telling their suffering, and this is where it's very interesting, because, everybody probably agreed these poor women's suffering was worse than everybody else's, sexually abused and tortured. But it was very clear that they weren't angry, because they have the view of karma, and I haven't talked about that, but they have the view of karma. This is a philosophical view that is driven that is the logic for the Buddha of why things happen. That every living being, every millisecond, whatever we think and do and say, is like programs us, produces the person we become. We produce ourselves. Dalai Lama said one time, karma is like self-creation. You don't need creating by other people, we create ourselves, life after life. That's what they say. So all the anger and neurotic and miserable and harming of others, that produces our future suffering. All our virtue and goodness, that produces our future happiness. So these young women would not be angry. They're not saying, how dare this happen to me? I don't deserve it. They have a view for why it's happening. Karma is in the bones of the being of Indians and Tibetans for thousands of years. It's natural for them. It's new for us, right? But for them, it's natural. So then they were able to bear their suffering. They didn't get angry, but they worked on themselves. They probably would happily escape, but they couldn't. And then even one of them at the end, there was tears. And she said, and this is the part that's shocking for us, she said, and of course we had compassion for our torturers, because we knew that we must have harmed them in the past. Because the Buddhist view, and of course it's cosmic for us, the Buddhist view is we've got countless past lives, and the law of karma is a natural law. No one runs it, no one invented it, no one's manipulating it. It just happens, and there's no accident. A law means there's nothing random or accidental. So whoever we meet, whoever we see, whatever they do to us, whatever we do, it's part of this natural law. That's the Buddhist view. So they have that view very deeply. So they know that if we're being harmed, or equally if someone's kind to you, you know that you've been kind to them in the past, something like that. So that was very powerful for their minds, and that's the basis of their compassion. And we had compassion for them because we knew we must have harmed, and because we knew that they would suffer in the future because of the terrible harm they were doing. So that's the one of karma, and that's the basis of compassion. If you, you see your child, you know yourself, your child, they're being horrible. You know they're harming themselves, and you don't want them to suffer. That we understand, I think. You get my point? Yeah, that's the basis of it. It's a very interesting one. What else, people? Oh, good, wonderful. Come in.
Can you ask the title mentions Mahamudra? Can the Venerable Robina summarize the meaning of Mahamudra?
Okay.
Does she have a way of explaining the mirror-like mind?
Exactly. The which-like mind?
Mirror-like mind.
Mirror-like. Okay, good. I'll talk about that, yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I forgot that was in the title. Because you see, we're teaching that over 4 weeks in London at Jamyang. This text, by the way, that person, they should know that. Every Wednesday we're teaching this text. We did the first one on Wednesday. So, okay, let me talk about that then. So Mahamudra, yeah, it's a Sanskrit word, and it's referring to a very specific kind of meditation that's a meditation on the mind. It's a very intimate meditation. It's a very precise meditation, concentration meditation. It's the okay, start again. There are two modes of meditation. We all know in Buddhism. You've got concentration or shamatha, and then you've got vipassana. And this technique, Mahamudra, is the linking of these two. So the first mode of the first part of the meditation is simply concentration, like you would concentrate on your breath, concentrate on whatever you're doing. It's a very straightforward concentration technique, So, but the thing you begin to focus on is not the breath, is not a visualization, is the thought, is your mind itself. So initially, that's very busy. The thoughts are all chatting away, so you focus on them. But the idea is, as you get better at this meditation, and you're not buying into the thoughts, you're not feeding into them, you're not stirring them all up, they eventually mind will become more calm, and eventually you start to focus at a subtle level of what they call the clarity of the mind, which is quite subtle. And so this is where so then the second part of meditation is then where you start to observe the way the self arises, and you begin to eventually realize the emptiness of the mind. But forget even that. The first one, the mirror of the mind, is really helpful. So Lama talks a lot about this in the book, and this is I think it's a wonderful way to describe the way our mind works, you know. We think of the mind, of course, as the bits and pieces in the brain. That's okay, there is a brain there, no argument. But this Buddhist approach is more subtle because it's the cognitive process itself you're trying to become familiar with. So the way they say in Buddhism is that the mind cognizes things like a mirror. The mind reflects. So let's see if we can understand that. So we know, let's say, if there's lots of anger in your mind, then it's like everything out there. We know this, the way Lama puts it. Whatever's out there, the boyfriend you're mad at, the traffic, the politician, the thing out there is reflected back to the mirror of your mind in the aspect of whatever's in the mirror. So if the mirror is dirty, if your mirror is dirty, then whatever's reflecting will look dirty, won't it? I think of like a body of water, completely still water. The trees on the riverbank will be reflected precisely in the water, won't they? Because the water's calm. But if the water's turbulent, the tree will look crooked. And so what Buddha's saying, in a sense, is all we do is see reflections of everything seen through the mirror of our mind. Don't think of it as cosmic. So if your mind's full of attachment, it's emotional hunger, you're always dumping responsibility on other people, you look at the cake, it looks totally divine to you. This we know. If you've got lots of attachment for food and that delicious cake on the plate, you describe that cake, you'll say, oh, it's so divine, look at it. And like you can't resist eating it because it looks so divine. It's like begging you to eat it. It's so exciting, isn't it? We know that. So that cake is appearing back to you through the aspect of whatever in your mind. So your mind's turbulent with attachment, it'll look divine, and the mind's overexcited and you've got to shove it in the mouth. It's irresistible, isn't it? If the mind is angry with a person, they will appear so ugly to you. So you're seeing everything, you know, in a mucky mirror. Your mind's got covered with anger or jealousy or depression or anxiety. Everything appears to you in that aspect. We can understand that. So when you think of the mirror, what you're trying to do is the Buddhist is you're trying to clean the mirror. So the more even you focus on the mind in this particular meditation, and you try to steady the mind, you don't bite into every thought, then your cognitive process itself will start to calm down. So you'll taste some kind of clarity. And we know ourselves, you wake up one morning, you're fairly steady, you're not so excited, you're up and down, you're fairly clear. Well, the world will look quite not too bad to you. We kind of know this. We don't join the dots, you know. So the mirror of the mind is a wonderful way to talk about how our mind functions. So what we're trying to do is clean the mind up. Yes, there are problems out there. So this is an interesting point too. Let's say, you know, you've got a bunch of racists out there, you know, let's just say, and then they are racist. They're facts, they're mean, they're horrible, they're psychopaths, or they're fundamentalists, whatever, all the crazy people in the world. There are crazy people in the world. So then we think, well, how would they appear to me if I didn't have anger? That's an interesting point, isn't it? How would they appear to me if I didn't have anger? It's not as if you suddenly say, oh, they're not really racist after all. It's all made up by my mind. No, they are crazy people. But the difference is, and I can tell you this from my own experience of lessening my own anger. With anger, let's say when I was a political activist, whatever group I was involved in, you hated the other group. You hated all the other people. And you couldn't even stand meeting a person who didn't think like you. And you'd be shouting and yelling and you'd think they're the monsters and they're causing all the suffering. So now here I am, not so-called political anymore, but still got, you know, there's still racism, there's still sexism, there's still violence, there's still poverty. It's all there like it was 40, 50 years ago. What's different in my mind is I see it, but it doesn't disturb me. Now, that doesn't mean you don't have compassion. We often mix compassion with being disturbed. They're completely different. Compassion, like those young nuns, you know, abused, sexually abused and tortured.
and they were not angry. So they saw the suffering, they saw these people, and even when you work on your own mind enough, they were even able to see the craziness of these guys' minds and how they were suffering. That's the real thing. So you see the world more clearly in a way. I remember Martin Luther King, I always quote him. He said, it's good to find fault. There's suffering, there's racism, there's sexism, but then you say, how can I help? Whereas if you're only angry, you just want to kill them, you know? So the stuff's out there, but you see it different. You put new glasses on, you put more tolerant glasses on, but not just, oh, well, they're angry, who cares? You also actually have compassion. But compassion, like I said before, is not sentimental, you know? So the world is still suffering, you see it more clearly, but it doesn't agitate you. That's the big difference. The Dalai Lama, I think you cannot get a better example. He's now 86 or something. 86 or something. He took over running that country at his 16 years old. 70 years he hasn't stopped, you know. 70 years he hasn't stopped trying to fix it. He has never given up. You talk to him now, he's perky and funny and cracks jokes about the Chinese communists. It has not disturbed him. It seems too weird for us. You think after 70 years you'd be exhausted and go mad, you know. He's not, he's relaxed. This seems really strange to us. And I think because we can't imagine not having anger, we can't imagine not having attachment, we can't imagine not having a mucking mirror mind, you know. And this is the Buddhist findings, these yogis and these, you can learn to be blissful and radiant and clear and compassionate. And it's the compassion that causes you to not want to ever give up helping others, you know. Very interesting approach, I think. What else, people?
Some more in line.
Good, come on.
How do we find the line between patience and not suppressing our
There
feelings?
you go. A very good point. This is I think this is a very tricky one. Like, in other words, like your point, when you ask about attachment, when we hear that word, we conflate it with what we call love, isn't it, in our culture? But the Buddhist view is love is altruistic, it's spacious, it's connected to others, it's not disturbing, it's a marvelous state of mind. It's the delight in other people being happy. But because for us it's mixed with attachment kind of pollutes it and drags it down. We don't notice the difference. So when you've got no attachment, you'd be a high being if you didn't have attachment. You'd just be enormously loving, kind person, but you'd be happy. So the other thing is, so then like say, anger, you didn't have anger. Okay, what we conflate anger with is like action. When I was a political activist, you had to action, you know, so you thought what fueled your action was anger. So then you thought, well, if I gave up anger, I'd chuck the baby out with the bathwater and I'd just go, oh, well, it doesn't matter. That's nihilism, it's not like that. So that's what you can see with my personality. Look at me, I shout and yell and scream and talk triple the pace of everybody else. Like I'm mentally ill, you know. But I can tell you with certainty, I don't have the same anger I had before, you know. So, but I haven't lost the action component. So if I chucked out the anger, you think you're going to become more patient and kind of passive. That's revolting. I don't want to be like that. But you give up the neurotic finding fault, trying to harm people, and you keep the action component. Now, the other one, which I think is a really tricky one, is the difference between patience and passivity. So you patient people who don't get angry, put the so-called negative side of that, you'd be very passive. So patient people are marvelous because they put up with difficult things, but the passivity is not good. So the good part for angry people is the action part. You keep the action part, but try to help and not hurt people. But the patient one, patience means you see a problem and you greet the problem and it doesn't make you crazy, but you continue to act. There's one in prison, Sunny. I think she had incredible patience, but she wasn't passive. She never stopped for 17 years working on her freedom, but she didn't go crazy. So patience is a brave state of mind that will see the problem and know you can't change it, but you don't go crazy. But you never give up trying to act, but with long-term view. And that's what I think what the Dalai Lama's got. We confuse patience with passivity, and we confuse action with anger. So if you give up anger, you're going to give up action, and you think you're going to give up. If you're going to be patient, sorry, I'm confused there, but passivity is horrible. So a downside of patient people is you put up with things you shouldn't put up with. So have patience, but don't be passive. I don't know, I hope that helps. Does that make sense, you think? When you've got to know your mind because they seem so similar. Or even, for example, arrogance and self-confidence. Arrogance is this painful state of mind. You're overinflated, but you're really nervous. You can't bear meeting people who are better than you. But self-confidence is relaxed. You know, you're comfortable with who you are. They're very, very different, you know. Equally with humility. Humility sounds like you're all broken and down. We confuse it with low self-esteem. It's wrong. Humility, a person who's humble would be self-confident. A person who's arrogant, if you insult them, they flip over and they get low self-esteem. We all recognize low self-esteem. So it's very subtle. And the key thing in Buddhist psychology is the particular characteristic of the unhappy ones, the neurotic ones, is that they exaggerate. So low self-esteem exaggerates your ugliness. Arrogance exaggerates your fancy qualities. But humility is a valid state of mind because you're naturally delight in other people because you're self-confident. You're not threatened by it, you know. And the positive qualities are relaxed. They're open and spacious and relaxed. And the unhappy ones are miserable and constricted and tortured, you know. You have to see the difference. What else?
There's one that's similar to that, which is how to practice compassion without becoming a doormat and others take
That's
advantage.
exactly the same problem. Exactly that. Exactly that. So let's look at that one. Like, I can see in my family also there were 7 children, all different personalities. And so one of my sisters was like, she couldn't stand problems. There was always lots of violence and dramas. My father wasn't so well behaved and everything. Lots of fights, you know, we all responded differently, you know. So Julie was always trying to make the peace. She all the time tried to make the peace. She couldn't stand the apple cart being upset. So she was endlessly trying to make everyone happy and be mummy's little helper and fix this and do that person over there and make everything lovely, you know. So that looks kindness. It looks like kindness. I was just a troublemaker. I'd jump in and make trouble, you know. I was the angry one. But Julie, she was the patient one, the peaceful one, making peace. But I forgot the point. What was it?
Compassion and not being a doormat.
Okay, so it looks like she had compassion for everybody. But what caused her to do that wasn't compassion, was her attachment. Everyone's got attachment. Attachment in all of us only wants what I want. So her attachment manifested as her trying to make everyone happy because her attachment couldn't stand the problems. So she stuck her nose everywhere into everybody else's business. Are you hearing what I'm saying here? It's like, like your mummy's little helper. You run around helping mummy being a good girl, but that one is attached to being a good girl, attached to being seen to be a good girl. And then if you like that, you're weak and people can manipulate you and treat you like a doormat. But genuine compassion is with a lot of courage and confidence, and you cannot get hurt. But our compassion is mixed with our attachment to being a good girl, attachment to that kind of person. It's quite subtle. And that's why we get hurt. That's why we get hurt. That's why we get misused, you know. You are a nice person, but you're trying to make everyone else happy in a manipulative way because attachment can't stand problems. Can you hear that, people? It's a very tricky one. We've really got to see our minds, though. It's very tricky. That's a really common thing with some people. Go on. Yes, darling.
I think this is along the same lines.
Come on then.
2 very demanding neurodivergent children.
Okay, you got.
Trying to develop wisdom and compassion at the same time.
Yeah, good.
So I'll be looking after them all the time, thinking I want to go meditate and get some wisdom.
Okay.
And then I'll sit and meditate and think, I've got to go.
Got to help me then, I know,
So
darling.
it's quite hard on the household of perhaps. I wonder if you have any tips how to.
I know, darling. I think this is where I don't know if you heard her say it. She was just talking about trying to find the balance between the wisdom and the compassion. She runs around helping the kids all day and says, I've got to go and do some meditating and get some wisdom. And then I've got to go and help the kids. It's sort of like, if you think of the wisdom one as really the work you do on yourself, you're the immediate beneficiary, but as it helps you help them as well because you get more clarity. And the thing is with the compassion, taking care of children, especially in mothers, you're a mum, right? I mean, mums are the worst of this. Mums, you know, continue trying to make everything lovely and make the kid and worry about everything the kids do, and they're trying to change them. That's why we can't stand our mums sticking their nose in our business, isn't it? Because they love us, but their attachment wants us to be different. So if you're going to have the wisdom to see their problems and be wise in guiding them, but sort of give more confidence to them in knowing that they can put it together themselves. They don't need you to. I mean, mums love to micromanage, don't they? Is that true? Yes. Mums? I mean, because attachment wants things to be the way we want. Attachment's a junkie, and we've all got it, it wants to do what I want. So naturally, you can't help but dump that on your children. I'm not sure it's saying you necessarily, but mothers would want the kids. Now, if you're a really neurotic mother, which means with bucket loads of this neurotic attachment and possessiveness, you want to mold them into the shape that you want. And that's where it's scary for children, mothers, if kids go off and do something different, you know. So if you're a really manipulative mother, you're going to want them to be exactly like you want, and that's what makes you crazy.
But on the flip side, I'd quite like to go off to Copan for 3 months, but then is that not?
Well, well, you're a very wise mother then. She likes to go off 3 months of treats and leave her children alone. How old are they? 5?
Well, no, they're late teens.
Thank you. But they've got a father, maybe. Oh, all right. So you're okay. You're fine. If you leave your, maybe, you know, she's a brave mum, leaving her young kids together off while she goes off to retreat for 3 months.
But that feels not compassionate to leave them.
No, come on, that's the world view as well. No, that's if they've got that's wise. I mean, you've got 2 parents. Come on, they're so fortunate, and he's happy with it. And I mean, it's good. I think it's amazing. Are you happy with it? He looks like right. He looks like he's smiling. It's okay. Well, you're very fortunate. That's amazing. And it's very wise of you to do that. I mean, if you're a mum who's got so much attachment that you can't keep your kids out of your eyes, then that's neurotic. Even if they are teenagers, you know, that's where you've got so much attachment. So you've got a bit of wisdom. Well done, girl. What else? Any more there?
Is Mahamudra appropriate for beginning students of Buddhism?
Okay, that's interesting. It's a really advanced technique. Let me explain why. But it doesn't mean we can't try it. That's why Lama Yeshe will teach it to idiot Westerners who knew nothing. You know, he taught this in 1982 when people mostly were brand new. So and this is Lama's style. Lama was trying it. So let me tell you, it's very interesting, this one. You'll see what the analogy I use to show actually it's quite advanced practice. So it's all about getting the wisdom that understands the ultimate nature of the mind, the ultimate nature of yourself, emptiness, this business of emptiness, you know. With a really subtle awareness at the deepest level of the nature of how things are, ultimately the nature of how things are. It sounds quite subtle. So, as Lama says in this book, there are 2 main ways of getting this wisdom. And so the first one is the typical one, and we all know this. If you want to learn to be a musician, to learn Bach, you've got to study the theories. You've got to squeeze your brain with lots of theories and really work hard at the theory. Get the intellectual knowledge first, then you go to the piano and you practice. We all know that's the method we have. If you want to learn to make cakes, you know the recipes, then you make the cake. We get that. That's exactly the method. Now, this Mahamudra style is completely different. And using the analogy of music, the Mahamudra approach to realize, in the monasteries, as Lama says, we learn all the theories, all the techniques, you learn all the philosophy, you study all about emptiness and impermanence, you have all this debating, there's lots and lots of theoretical teachings. And then in meditation, you start to experience the truth of it. But Mahamudra is like going straight to the piano and intuiting Bach. Now that's difficult, but that's really what Mahamudra is. You go straight into meditation in order to taste the nature of your own mind. So of course, you're advanced to do it, but we can certainly try it. It's very excellent. Lama really will stress that. So it's totally experiential, not intellectual, but totally experiential to get an experience of the ultimate nature of your own mind, which of course necessarily is subtle. And it can be difficult because, I mean, we don't know what the mind is. I mean, the world will have a very different view of the mind. It can be, and meditating can make people crazy, you know, you don't know what you're doing. So it implies you're already grounded in some kind of practice. But we certainly can try it, absolutely. And Lama Yeshe's book, I highly recommend it. It's wonderful. What else they're carrying?
Is it wrong to set boundaries and not always support others to protect yourself from harm from others? Totally
correct thing to do. Everything is like, you know, you've got to know what you're capable of. So let's say you have a really neurotic mum. I mean, I'm not just being about mums. I love my mum. We know mums can be very attached. And mums are people just like you and me who are crazy. You know, we're all crazy. So let's say you've got a really manipulative mother or crazy mother or something, or anybody, doesn't matter who. And especially because it's a mother, got this intense bond, and yet it's enormous guilt, you know, and then so much pressure when you're with your mother or your brother, whoever it is, and then you'll explode and fight and all the dramas that happen with families. So if you've got to know where you are at, you have to know where you are at. You have to have the courage to know what is best for you. So that means if you really can't handle your mum, you don't blame your mother. You know you can't handle it. She's like a red rag to a bull for you. You take responsibility. You know you don't blame her. You know you can't handle it, so you back away. That's totally intelligent. And in most relationships, I mean, I always quote this number, the UNESCO or somebody, I don't know who they were, quotes this number in the world, that 40% of all women who get murdered on this planet are murdered by the bloke in the same bed, pretty much. Now, that's not against men. This shows the intensity of attachment relationships. When you're in each other's face day and night, it's not surprising you kill each other. So if you had any wisdom, any wits about us, we would be aware. At our clubbers, we're not aware of what we're missing. We're not aware of our dramas until your husband tries to kill you. This is the craziness of our relationships, you know. So if you have any self-awareness, you're aware, you know the dangers. You bloody well leave him before he kills you. But we don't. We like moths to a flame, you know. So you've got to have your boundaries. You've got to know what you can handle. But don't blame the other person. Because when you've got compassion, when you're really advancing your bodhisattva, you will love your mother. She'll be more, you know, she'll be like as easy as pie to like, but when you're full of your own miseries, you can't handle it. You've got to know this, but don't blame the other person. It's really important. I hope that makes sense. What else?
Nothing else here.
That's it? Nothing more? Yes.
It's not actually a question, but I
Yes,
just thought
David.
that people might like to know.
Go,
We are
David.
having some teachings on Mahamudra from this centre every Thursday evening. So just.
Oh,
just
wonderful.
let people
Very
know
good.
that.
Who's teaching it?
I am.
Oh, well done. You're using which book? You're using which text?
It's the Dalai Lama's text, the Galatia tradition of.
That's a
Mahamudra.
big fat book, though.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, we're starting, but it has 3 parts. So we're starting with this term, we're just doing the root text. So we're just
Oh,
doing
good,
the
that's
basic level. And then next term, we'll go into deeper into the
Oh, this
first
is wonderful.
commentary. And then if people still want to more, then we
Okay.
can do the third
Okay, good,
sub-commentary
Wonderful.
later after that.
Good, good, good. This is great. I'm
So
very
just thought
happy.
it might be helpful.
Absolutely helpful, David. It's good. Fantastic. Well, I don't know. I think it's time to go. It's a bit early, but shouting and yelling for 90 minutes is more than enough. I'm not an old people person, but they saw this movie my nephew made about me 20 years ago. They were shocked, you know. It's not I'm not a normal Buddhist. And this Tibetan saw it and he said, it's a movie for hopeless cases. I'm a movie for hopeless cases. I thought that's good enough, isn't it? But I'm not fit. Apparently, I don't fit the model of what a good Buddhist nun should be. I don't know. Anyway, it's enough of me. I think it's enough of 90 minutes. If you want more, you can come back tomorrow. Okay, we're going to go into greater detail about attachment, aren't we?
Yeah.
Isn't it? Detail, I promise you. Yeah, I always joke about how loud I am. I should shut up. Okay. So anyway, any more questions, people? Just in case, any burning questions? Yes, come on. Talk to me, darling.
When you realize these fantastic insights of Eastern culture and you start to realize where we've gone wrong in the West, I was wondering, and you know, you've spoken about this today. I was wondering whether you think there are what bits of Western culture, or if there are like
no, darling.
Western cultural values that you think are valuable, that you think where places where we have got it right here.
Oh, I think there's no question. I mean, the reason I talk this way now is more to highlight the points that in Buddhism that aren't in the West. So it's not trying to paint a miserable picture. I mean, I'm the product of the West. I'm a product of Catholicism. I love my background. I was in love with God, all that religious aspect, which is totally Western. I had completely, I mean, there's so much, and there's so much common ground. So the main reason for me here is to make a point that is obviously different from the Western one. But I mean, yeah, there's so much amazing knowledge in the West, so much. Of course, there's no question about that. And you don't need me to tell you, they're all there. So I made it sound a bit extreme, did I?
No, I think you're right about a lot of the
okay.
Cultural and value, things that we value.
Yes.
Seems to have got it wrong in a lot of places.
I think I think this is actually the point. The good side of the Western approach of emphasizing the external is our ingenious sciences. That is no question, and it comes from that view. So the negative side is we put all the emphasis on the outside, but the good side is as well. The genius of creativity in the West about manipulating external world. That's our science. There's no question that's our genius. That is unsurpassable. You see my point?
Yeah.
Do you agree with that?
Yes.
Yeah, there you go. So the good and the bad fit together. So the Tibetans have this genius. I mean, Buddhism went there in about 7th century, intact from India. This big, monastic university system went straight to Tibet. and this amazing country of yogis and scholars and holy beings and all the rest. So the good side of Tibet was it was kept in isolation. It kept intact. I mean, nobody went there, you know, nobody went there. So it was kept intact, but it was like internal knowledge is unbelievable, the genius of their internal knowledge, but externally they were a disaster, you know. I mean, there was no external wisdom, there's no external progress at all. So it was extreme. So maybe we're extreme in the West. There's a bit of a balance, I think. We can learn from each other. Do you understand?
Yeah.
Okay, petals. See something tomorrow, maybe, or next time, whatever, next life. I don't know. Thank you so much. I'm just thinking. Okay, okay, good. I had a microphone, didn't seem to work, did it? Taking the Buddhist approach. There's 90 minutes we've been together, is how long it is. Not 1 millisecond of it has gone astray. The Buddhist view is everything we see, hear, taste, touch, smell is programmed in our memory. And we've sown seeds in our minds. So it's an hour and a half of really delicious, hard work. So we're just thinking to finish, maybe nourish these seeds, you know, with our goodness, with our virtue, with our practice, with our effort to develop our own true nature, to develop our marvelous potential, to be a benefit to others, and maybe never give up. That's the key. Never give up, people. That's the one. Never give up. Okay. Thank you. Bye. Go then, shall I? Shall I go? All right. Well, I'll stand here for a second. You go. I'll see you.
Excuse me. Hello, that will be available. Yes.